Hello, I'm Porschia Parker Griffin, and I want to welcome you to the Career 101 podcast, a place for ambitious professionals and seasoned executives who want an edge in their career. We're talking about all of the things you were never taught or told when it comes to career growth, development, and change. Now, let's get into it. Today, we are talking about Employment Law 101, Discrimination in the Workplace with Angel Horacek. Angel James Horacek practices employment and civil rights law on behalf of employees, focusing primarily on anti-discrimination work. She represents employees in courts, arbitrations, and administrative hearings. She also counsels employees in select pre-litigation matters. Angel is admitted to practice in all state courts in California. Prior to starting her own firm, Ms. Horacek was an associate commercial litigator at an Am Law 100 firm focusing on business and corporate clients. She then transitioned to representing individuals as an associate attorney at a boutique employee-side litigation firm. Hi, Angel. How are you today?
Portia, hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you with us to discuss Employment Law 101 and discrimination in the workplace. But first, we want to know a little more about you. So tell me about 7-year-old Angel.
Oh gosh. Where should I start? So 7-year-old Angel, I would say, probably didn't think she was going to be an attorney. I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And I was sorely disabused of that notion when I learned that doctors have to deal with a lot of gross things. So that was a rude awakening. But I've always been very curious about how things work and, kind of what are the rules behind what makes things move. So in terms of science, thinking about the rules of physics and things like that. So it was kind of a natural flow, I think, into law because it's completely rules based for the most part.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So what was your first job, Angel?
Oh boy. My first job was during the summers as a camp counselor. And I always feel like if you really want to know about the human experience, you should hold at least one of three jobs at your point during your life. One is working with children, one is with working retail, and the other is working with food service in some way. I feel like you will learn a lot about yourself and a lot about people working in one of those three industries. So working as a camp counselor really helped me, I think, be able to explain things at a level, break it down for kind of the tiniest nuggets for folks to be able to understand, the little ones to understand, and then also dealing with their parents who sometimes don't want to hear what happened with their kid that day. So it really helps you in the customer service angle. I really enjoyed it though. I really like working with children.
Wow, it sounds so fun. I mean, I think camp counselor was one of those things that I kind of wanted to do, but never got a chance to. I can check off the retail and the fast food boxes, Angel. My first job was at Wendy's. I was taking orders at the drive-through and passing out bags at the second window. So I did get that experience.
It is an experience. I think you learn a lot about kind of what people's tolerance is and how people will treat other people. So it's just, I think, do you feel like you learned a lot doing that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So many things. Customer service, psychology, getting along with others who are completely have a different frame of reference and goals and all of that from you. But yes, I agree. I think that experience definitely sets you up to understand other people in a really, really big way.
Yeah, I think definitely. It's kind of interesting sometimes when you work in those fields and you kind of learn no matter what your work performance is, sometimes it really doesn't matter to that particular individual because they want a particular outcome. And in some ways, there was really nothing that you were going to be able to do to influence how they feel about what their experience was.
I think you said that perfectly. The way I could say it is, please don't curse me out because we're out of barbecue sauce, you know? You said it much better, much better. I love it, Angel. So tell us about some highlights or pivotal moments in your career before you started your own firm.
Mm. That's such an interesting question. Let's see. Before I started my, I guess, one of the pivotal moments I think for me was definitely passing the bar exam. It's such a huge milestone, I think, for any practicing attorney. And it was very, not that I doubted I was going to pass, but the California bar exam is notorious for having a very low pass rate relative to other state bars. And then I think if you actually look at kind of the numbers demographically, um, African Americans have kind of a worse track record in terms of that. And so even though I had felt well prepared coming out of the school, UCLA, rep UCLA, that I went to, it was still kind of in the back of my mind. But I was so happy to have, I think, put in the work and then, pass that bar exam because you can't really you can't go to court, if you're not barred. And, in my mind, I wanted to be the type of attorney that went to court. And there's certainly things you can do with a legal degree that don't involve going to court. But for me, that was, I think, a huge factor.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've heard, a lot of people who had challenges passing the bar exam. So hats off to you. So what would you say have been some of your biggest career challenges so far before starting your own firm?
Mm. Um, some of the biggest career challenges, I think, kind of largely comes out of, I would say, maybe the history of how law is practiced or the tradition of how law is practiced. And as I said before, like it's very rules based in terms of the actual law itself. But sometimes when you work at a large firm, there are traditional things that exist there that make it difficult, I think, to be the person that you may identify as, right? So I worked at a large firm. That firm was an East Coast firm. There are wonderful people at that firm, but sometimes I found that um, it could be constricting in terms of what's expected of you. So certainly there is an hours requirement at almost all firms. There's a certain amount of hours you have to bill to be able to put in that work. Maybe let's call that 2,000 hours a year. I'm being very just to make the numbers work. But what they don't kind of tell you is that, well, that's billable. You have to then do a certain amount of numbers, of showing up to maybe continuing legal education classes or FaceTime in the office meetings and things that don't really count toward that billable requirement. And so you end up spending a lot of your time, and all time is finite. We only have so many hours in a day, in a year. Spending a lot of your time kind of doing things that don't necessarily lend themselves to the benefit of the client and are kind of just historically because people expect you to be in your seat, you know, 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, whatever it is. And you're kind of starting to see some of this now, where people are pushing back and they want to stay and be remote, right? They want to have the flexibility to come in when they want to come in. And so it's been very interesting to kind of watch as the effects of the pandemic have shifted some of this, I would say, time power back to the workers because traditionally I found it very constricting. So that was a big challenge, I thought, for me.
Absolutely. I have heard that from a lot of attorneys, Angel. I will say that um, attorneys, it's a pretty large group of people I've seen in our career coaching practice who wanted to transition out of either law or just working for a law firm, right? They wanted to go in-house somewhere to kind of get away from the, 60, 70, 80 plus hour weeks. The way I heard someone put it to me before was that, hey, I can work 10 years, work my butt off for the firm, and then still not make partner, So I have heard a bit about that from some of our clients.
And then as somebody once described it to me, a senior associate at the time, they were considering partnership and then they were like, well, is this even something I want? Because effectively it's winning a pie eating contest where the prize is more pie. You just become more responsible for other things, right? And so certainly there's the share of profits in terms of becoming an equity partner, but if you can't enjoy your life, what difference does it make?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are some of the tough questions that I'm sure a lot of your clients kind of, express to you, and we hear from our clients as well. So, Angel, I really want to start with the basics. What is employment law?
So the way that I define employment law, it's the practice of law that relates to the obtaining and the maintaining, and sometimes the ending or separation of employment, at will employment between a person generally and a firm, whether that's a business, a sole proprietorship, depending on how that's structured.
Mhm.
I would distinguish it from labor law. Um, they're related, but I would distinguish it from labor law in terms of labor law, really specifically kind of dealing with, I would say, unions and collective action, more of um, the relationship between labor and capital, kind of, and not to get too into, Marxism and things, but, you have a group of people that work and a group of people that is the capital. And, the relationship between what those groups can do, what they do for each other. But employment law, as I look at it, is specifically related more to the individual and not so much the compensation, but there certainly are issues related to compensation that can affect an individual in the way that labor law is not implicated. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. It does. And from my perspective, I've seen, people say that they were a labor attorney or, an employment law attorney. I've seen some people kind of say employment and labor. So thank you for clarifying that for me.
Sure, there's a lot of different. I think it's good to ask that question because there's a lot of different areas of, I would say, law related to employee employers. For instance, there's workers' compensation law, which is a whole different subset. Like I don't practice that area at all, but it is related to obviously employers and employees, or even ERISA law, which is related to kind of retirement employee benefits, and that's something totally different too. So I'm kind of almost everything that those things aren't. That's
Mhm.
kind of what I deal with is the relationship of the individual toward the employer and vice versa.
Got it. Got it. So I know that you specialize in anti-discrimination work. What are the most common discrimination issues that you see your clients have in the workplace?
Oh, wow. That's such a broad question. I think it de the most common issues that I see. Well, can I talk about kind of like the most obvious,
Yeah,
maybe? Is that a good? Okay. So I'll
yeah.
frame it that way. The most obvious issues that come up in terms of discrimination is twofold. It's where an employee is not given the same opportunities as a different employee because of usually what they look like. Okay. So sometimes we see um, there will be colorism where only the light-skinned employees of a particular place get to work in front of house versus people who work in the kitchen, right? Back of house. And the darker people work there. That could be color, that could be race, it could be language, depending on what that situation is, right? So that's how it might present itself. But the more oftentimes I see this presented is an employee changes somehow during the course of their employment. The employee becomes pregnant. The employee comes out of the closet or gets outed at work in some way. The employee gets married. The employee maybe transitions, right, at work, and or the employee becomes disabled somehow or asks for medical leave somehow. Those are usually the ways in which the discrimination starts happening. It's the employee was presented a certain way, was able-bodied, was a straight appearing, whatever, and then some change happened, and then the employer starts treating them differently, usually based on that condition. So that's that last one. That's what I would say is kind of the usually what happens. And
Mhm.
then they end up calling me.
Got it. Got it. Um, so when they notice that they're starting to be treated differently, what are some common kind of things that your clients notice or tell you about in terms of, their employment or their environment changing?
Sure. So one of the most obvious things that happens is they start getting either like territory taken away or their sales quota raised. They might lose opportunities for overtime work, where if maybe they always regularly got overtime and then all of a sudden they're no longer being asked to work overtime where other people are. So in terms of usually those are the compensation type issues. Sometimes it's a removal of responsibility. Sometimes it's as obvious, honestly. I've had situations where clients have gotten an email, oh, well, you're pregnant now. We're going to give this account to, you know, X man because he can handle it. He doesn't have those physical limitations. So, and sometimes it may not even really be coming. I would say it's not necessarily coming out of a malicious place. Sometimes the employer thinks they're doing what that employee would want or what they would want for themselves on behalf of that employee, right? They might want a lighter schedule if they were pregnant, but they never asked the employee if that's what they wanted. So I would definitely watch out for either a change in compensation, a change in hours. Sometimes there can be disciplinary action that's unwarranted. So, like a written warning, a verbal warning, a performance write up, a performance improvement plan, where before you always had previous reviews that were positive. That's usually how it starts presenting itself.
Wow.
Some sort of shift. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that because a lot of times I hear from clients, they wonder if it's in their head. They have a feeling that things have changed. Like you said, maybe there was a change with them, and then they feel like things are different, but it's hard to explain. So I'm glad that you gave us some kind of tangible scenarios and circumstances that you see, because again, it's easy for someone to think that this is in their head. The Career 101 podcast is brought to you by Fly High Coaching, where we help our clients soar to their full potential. More and more professionals and executives are setting out to achieve their career goals. But without the right support, it can be difficult, if not impossible. Whether you need career coaching, interview coaching, or a professional resume, we're here to help. Check us out on our website, fly-highcoaching.com.
Yeah, and it's hard to know because nobody wants to think that this is happening to them, especially if you worked somewhere for a long amount of time. Over a course of years, you feel like, they know me, we're family. It's your second home, you spend so much time there, and that's not where anybody kind of runs to, like, oh, they're discriminating against me and haha, let me call the attorney. That's never really how it goes in terms of my clients. It's always kind of like the last resort. Like, I have eliminated every other possible rational reason why they would be doing this. And I can't come up with anything other than some unlawful purpose.
Angel, you made me think about a kind of a more pop culture reference to this. And I don't know if you've heard this. And so I'm not sure if this is true, but someone was telling me with, Rihanna performing pregnant at the Super Bowl that one, the Super Bowl committee, they were mad because they didn't find out she was pregnant until she showed up for rehearsal. And then I was reading somewhere that they said she wouldn't be asked back to perform at the Super Bowl, because that she was
Hmm.
pregnant. And I first thought, come on, I mean, most people perform at the Super Bowl. That's a once in a lifetime thing. So I don't think she's twiddling her thumbs waiting for that to come back. But I turned to my husband and I said, this is exactly why women don't share that they're pregnant. If someone had presented her with this opportunity to perform at the halftime show and she said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so excited and I'm pregnant," they might have pulled the offer, right?
Right.
And this is exactly why I also have women clients who feel like they don't want to talk about the fact that they want to have children at some point in time, or they want to have a family, they want to get married, those sorts of things, because they fear that like you mentioned, responsibilities, opportunities will be taken away from them.
Yeah. No, it's exactly true. And that's a very interesting scenario thinking about the Super Bowl thing. I mean, I think you're right I don't know that people are asked to come back, right? I think you know, the irony about that whole thing is I don't think that she's an employee, right? As I
Right.
understand it, if you're presenting halftime at the Super Bowl, you actually have to pay for that exposure yourself. They don't pay you.
Mhm.
So she is, they're providing a showcase, but she is fronting, as I understand it, all of the monies to put that program on. So I think she was right to do whatever performance she wanted as long as it fell within whatever the FCC allowed. I don't see what the problem was. I was entertained actually, and I was surprised by how visually striking it was,
Mhm.
and how many songs she didn't sing because they easily could have run through a medley of even more songs, but they didn't do that. They were very selective in about what they performed, so I enjoyed the show. I don't even know if it would have been possible to have some sort of clause where she would have had to disclose to them, right? That would
Mhm.
have been kind of violative. And quite frankly, by the time she signed the agreement, who knows whether she was even anticipating being pregnant.
Right.
Um, but I think you're right. I think a lot of people who are anticipating having children, they are fearful of disclosing that to their employers. And a lot of people have put their own personal lives in the hopes to grow a family on the back burner for so long. I know people who are freezing their eggs
Mhm.
because they want to hit partner or they want to achieve whatever professional milestone before they take the time to have a child because of, what their fear is at work. And I just personally um, don't feel like that's a great way to have a work relationship where that if that's how you feel your work feels about you, I think you need to consider kind of the company you're keeping, quite frankly.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It's a very real thing for a lot of women. So, Angel, what do you recommend a professional or executive do if they think that they are being discriminated against?
Mm, okay. Um, well, let me even back up because I think there's a couple things in terms of like general housekeeping,
Mhm.
even before you get to this point, right? Like if you are working at a firm and they have a human resources department, I strongly urge everybody to honestly just check what's in your personnel file from time to time. You can set a regular interval. It's kind of like healthy credit score reporting. Like just see what's in there. You don't want to be surprised by anything that's in your personal file. So anything anybody might have written about you, about your performance. Maybe you had a conversation with your boss and you thought it was fine, but they actually reduced it to writing and put it in your file. You may not know that until such point as, you're asking later to look at your file or you're being told this is your second or third warning and you're going, wait, what was my first warning? I didn't know that. So you want to check in there just, I would say, at a regular interval, maybe on your anniversary date, just to see what's in there. I would definitely also recommend when you receive your performance evaluations, or I don't know if that's annual or however, whatever the regular interval at which you receive those from your work, keep a copy. Keep a copy for yourself. You can keep it digitally, but do not maintain it digitally on, in your email, in your work email. I would definitely have a copy. If you want to print it, fine, but have it and keep it in a safe place, maybe at home. So you have it to refer to, because later, if you get called in on something that you feel is unfair or you don't remember or was never mentioned, you can go back and check your records without having to go to HR to ask what's in your file.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of if you think this is already happening to you, you're being targeted for discrimination, you think you're being treated differentially. I would start keeping a log, honestly. Start keeping a log of what you feel is the differential treatment. So, discrimination has a legal definition, and it's basically being treated in a differential manner than somebody else based on your protected class, right? So, if the protected class is, if you're a woman, if you think it's gender discrimination or it's sexual orientation discrimination, you are being treated worse than somebody else who is not in your protected class. I would start keeping notes of what happened when, who maybe did not receive the same treatment or who received preferential treatment, right? Because eventually, when you're going to make a complaint to either your supervisor or human resources, you want to be able to say, well, on today's date, this is what happened. I was in the break room and somebody came up to me and said, good morning to the white person next to me, and not at all. They didn't speak to me at all as the black person. That in and of itself is not necessarily going to be determinative of whether you are discriminated against, but it goes to bias, right? It goes to the workplace environment. So that's kind of what I would recommend if you think that this is starting to happen to you.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it sounds like people should be proactive, checking what's in their files and keeping their own copies of performance reviews and notes on just different events that are going on. It's great advice. So Angel, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people make with their discrimination cases against their employer?
Mm. In terms of mistakes, I would say a couple things. One is, so assuming the person's still employed, one of the things that they don't do is they don't approach. It's so hard when you've identified with you've been working at a company for a long time. You still think of the you and the company as a we. And if this is happening to you, you need to kind of stop yourself from thinking of you as and the company as a we, as a unitary, and start thinking more adversarially. It's kind of difficult to make that mental shift. A lot of folks, honestly, like they just want discrimination to stop. They just want to go back to work and have things the way they were. And sometimes that's not possible. That's not within the realm of, the possible. And so I would say talking through that with somebody not at your work, okay, but somebody else, outside of work, maybe that you can be honest with would be helpful. Sometimes what happens is people are very frank and honest with their coworkers, and then later the coworkers get called into HR for an investigation, and they're asked to disclose comments. And sometimes those comments are not helpful um, to the individual that is having the issue, even though it might be true. So I would say just be aware of who you're talking to at work, because if the discrimination is starting to happen, then you kind of need to shift it from a we to a I and a them. It sounds really unfortunate, but you have to protect yourself and think about yourself. And that's the problem, is that a lot of folks, they think about the company first.
Mm-hmm.
That's one issue that I could just think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great point. And I tell our clients that also from just a career perspective, right? With progression, a lot of times talking to your coworkers and your colleagues at your company is not necessarily as beneficial as you think it might be. One thing we see a lot of too, and this could also go into the whole preparing a case thing, but when we've worked with clients who are creating an exit strategy, maybe they're trying to get a new job or they want to start their own business or something, and they start talking to their coworkers about it. And I just generally say, like, that kind of, information is just really sometimes too explosive for someone to keep, even if you think they're your friend. um I've had clients where they shared that kind of information, and their whole exit strategy or whatever else they were planning was affected, negatively, because they're thinking these people at work are my friends, and
Mhm.
it kind of comes back.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. And you almost don't even want to put your coworkers in that position because even if they are your friend, what's going to happen is let's assume there's an investigation because eventually a person has reported discrimination. HR is supposed to investigate. So if they're doing their job, they're going to talk to everybody that might have information. And so if you're known to have a work pal, HR is going to know that they're going to talk to that person, and now that person is being put on the spot in terms of having being asked to disclose conversations, and they kind of are obligated to. And if they don't, then their job's at risk. So I would just say be careful about the counsel you keep at work because everybody has different motivations that don't necessarily align with your own.
Yeah, I completely agree. So let's think now, Angel, I guess from the perspective of a company. I know that you exclusively represent individuals, but if you could talk to, companies, how do you think that companies can reduce instances of discrimination in the workplace?
Oh, sure. I got a lot of thoughts about this. All right. So, um, so at least I know a lot of companies and they are obligated to make sure that if you have over 50 employees, I believe you have a certain amount of human resources training regarding discrimination or harassment and how to prevent that. And it's required for supervisors and managers. I would strongly urge companies, if they have the bandwidth to do so, the financial resources to do so, give that training to everyone. Don't limit it to just employees and sorry, to just who are managers and supervisors, because a lot of times what happens is there might be two coworkers the same level and one is harassing the other. They don't have a supervisory authority, but they're harassing that other person. And the person who's being harassed might escalate it to a supervisor or manager, but if the person who is the harasser hasn't explicitly been told that what they are doing could be harassment, it's much easier to prevent a problem from starting in the first place
Mhm.
than it is to fix something that's already broken. Right. So even if the manager, if they get a report about this harassment, they can take steps to end it. Maybe they move the harasser to a different place, depending on the level of the harassment. They might terminate someone, but it would have been so much easier if the person had been told, hey, this type of behavior isn't okay in the first place, and continue to do that training. That shows a value. That shows a value judgment on behalf of the employer where they really think it's valuable. Because I feel like what that's saying is it's okay if our, lower level employees harass each other, but once they report it, then it becomes our problem. No, it should be your problem the whole time. You should never want it to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So Angel, tell us more about your firm.
Mm. I have a law corporation in California. I love practicing in California because I feel like we have some of the most worker-friendly laws. I still think there could be a lot of progress made, but in terms of where the country's at, like I feel really good about how California is progressing. I don't take a lot of matters. It's just me, and I work for myself, with some staff, but I love being able to represent individuals. That's one of the things I kind of missed when I worked at a large firm is that you're representing companies. I mean, there are individuals who work at the companies you're interacting with, but it makes such a difference, I think, to my clients, to just be able to know you're helping them in their lives and not, helping a company. So I love picking my clients, choosing my clients, and one of the things that's great about having your own company is if I decide there's somebody maybe I don't want to work with or they'd be a better fit with somebody else, I can make that referral to them. I don't have to take that client. And I can find them somebody that's better suited to them, and that actually works for everybody. So, that's one of the great things about, I think, being in business for yourself is that you can choose your path and the people that you work with.
Agreed, agreed. Well, we will be providing a link to your website and your other social channels in our show notes so that people can find you online. But what is the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Sure. If people are interested in a consultation, they can certainly visit the website. It's horaceclaw.com, HORACEKLAW.com, and there's a little form on there. And if you fill out that form, it comes to us and we can start getting some background information in terms of conflict checks and then see if it's something that we can help with. If it's something that we can't, we certainly know people who can, but that's usually how most folks contact us and start a case with us.
Great, great. So, Angel, my last question for you, and I like to ask every guest this question. How do you think executives or professionals can get a positive edge in their career?
I think the best thing that folks can do is actually have conversations with other people, including active listening. If you're actively listening to the people that you meet, I don't even like to think about it in terms of networking, but when you meet someone, like listen to what they have to say about what their career is and keep it in mind. And later on in your life, later on, it could be that month, that week, it could be later that day, you're going to think of something related to what they do and then just shoot them an email and say, hey, I just heard this thing on the radio. It reminded me of when you said that you like working with, dogs or whatever it is. And so help you're having a good day. That will distinguish you and help you stay top of mind of people. And that's usually when things open up, is when you have shown that you've done active listening with those people. And it's not just about what can they do for you, but it's also, I'm thinking about you as an individual and I respect you as a person.
I love it. I love it. All right, Angel. Well, you have shared a lot of tips with us today that I'm sure our listeners can use to be more confident in their own careers and make sure that, they know if discrimination, is going on or not. So we really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Portia. It's been lovely to speak with you. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. This episode was brought to you by the Bravebird Career Alliance, the go-to membership designed for seasoned executives and ambitious professionals with everything you need for career planning, strategy, training, and support. Thank you again for listening to the Career 101 podcast. I hope you have at least one key takeaway that you can use in your own career. If you enjoyed hanging out with us, please rate, subscribe, and share this podcast. Until next time, here's to your success.